Hello,
Hello.
everyone. So everyone, welcome to Aptweek's first webinar of 2026. I see the chat is starting to pop, so of course, as usual, help us make sure we are not talking just to our computers, and do tell us in the chat how you guys doing, where you're
Hello.
based, and all the usuals. We have a great webinar coming your way. So we're very excited to bring you guys this content on how AI is changing the app stores. Seeing very good activities in the chat already. So thanks to everyone. We know we are live, so we're gonna get started, and hopefully more people join us underway. So before we get into the actual content, I'll do a little bit of the usual commercial mentions. If you are joining this webinar and aren't that familiar with AppTweak, AppTweak is an App Store marketing intelligence platform. And what that means that while you may know us for our ASO intelligence product that we've built for more than 10 years now, you might still learn that we actually offer a suite of products today, including a campaign manager for Apple Ads, a no-code reporting solution called Reporting Studio, app reviews manager, consulting services, market intelligence, API services, and more. And since today we're going to be talking about AI, might as well mention that for the past several years, we've been building a stack which we called Atlas AI, which is specifically trained on App Store and Play Store data, and that has allowed us to bring various features into our tools. The most recent of which being Ad Agent, the first agent of its kind, specifically for Apple Ads. And what makes it special is essentially the fact that it can access your campaign data specifically and bring you all the insights that you would expect from one of our consultants straight to you in a chat. So that will be all of my sales skills for today. And as we're going to get started, uh, want to make sure everyone's clear on what we're going to talk about. So I'll start with a presentation of changes AI has already brought to the app stores in 2025. And then we're going to talk mostly about how these changes have a big impact on how to approach search today. And that's why I'm very excited to have Chloe here with me. Chloe is one of our consultants. She's been working heavily, leading the efforts on how to adapt to the changes we are observing in search. And so she'll share with you what we think is a way to go from keyword optimization to semantic optimization. And before we do Q&A, we'll also have a final section on expectations for this year and beyond. Um, Final consideration also for people joining and the way to interact with our platform today, Livestorm. You have a chat in which you are more than welcome to interact. Some of our teammates are in the chat and can also interact with you. However, if you want to direct the questions towards Chloe or me, don't hesitate to use a questions box instead. That helps us store them easily. Other people can upvote your questions, and that will help us for the end of the webinar when we will try to have a Q&A section for everyone who's still with us at that point.
Mhm.
And now, without further ado, let's start on what has AI changed, what has it brought to app stores last year. Um, you might remember that the first change we got in the App Store that was powered by AI was the introduction of App Store tags. So App Store tags essentially appear as subcategories which you can find on your App Store page, as well as in certain sections, such as the search tab. Browse through them as if they were App Store collections. But to be honest, we haven't seen any major uptick in browse traffic coming from the fact that App Store tags were available. That means that, in our opinion, the real value of App Store tags is not necessarily the direct consumer feature, but rather what information it gives. App Store tags do show that essentially Apple is reading more of the app metadata. Apple is also considering context, and they are processing that information in ways that are likely to then impact how search results will be at some point impacted. Somewhat similarly, both Apple and Google have released in the first half of last year user review summaries on the store. Here, I think the value proposition was maybe a bit stronger already. We know that a lot of people check user reviews when deciding whether or not to download an app. So summaries looked like they might have a strong appeal. However, again, we haven't really seen a clear impact on conversion from summaries starting to appear in the store. And my personal opinion as to why that is that in terms of UX, they're not that easy to spot. In terms of content, in most cases, these summaries try to bring what should be a balanced perspective, but what also easily turns to be a very generic summary, which is not really actionable, which is not going to heavily influence store visitors one way or the other. What is interesting, though, is that, again, these summaries prove Apple and Google are reading the content of reviews. And that means if they are reading the content, they might be indexing what they find, they might be storing it and reusing it elsewhere. And this is what is going to matter for 2026. It's going to be how these first bits of information actually have an influence on other parts of the store. Last major consumer-facing change, I think, that was publicized last year was Sidekick, which is a new Google Play feature, which essentially allows game players, gamers, to interact with the Play Store, and in some places, specifically with Gemini, while playing rather than having to leave their game to actually interact. It's from a pure AI like technical standpoint, it's a quite impressive feat because it does show they are already processing what is called multimodal input. From an ASO perspective, though, this mostly shows things that are happening outside the store, reusing store data, but not something that is bound to have a clear impact on your ASO just yet. So when we had this history of changes, we definitely had the time to also reflect on how more significant changes were bound to happen and which ones would be the logical one. And here, to probably no one's surprise, when you consider that LLMs are trained on text, the first area that was expected to be heavily impacted is search. And this is what we actually found. So AI started influencing search before 2025. Apple specifically did introduce the promise of search the way you talk, which we have translated to mean natural language processing impacting search results. That happened in iOS 18, specifically 18.1, which was released back in 2024. What has been interesting, though, is that when we looked at the history of store algorithm changes in the US, we did find a much stronger algorithm change in June, which had not been announced in any way by Apple. In fact, this was the most significant algorithm change AppTweak ever recorded in the US. So we had to look at what happened. A popular theory at the time was that Apple had started using optical character recognition, OCR, which essentially means reading the text inside store creatives to index more keywords and to use those signals for search results computing. Um, I want to be very clear here that from a technological perspective, this is absolutely possible. We know Apple has the technology to do this. Anyone with an iPhone can actually extract the text in any of their images just by going to the Photos app. So it's definitely possible. And if it can fit on your device, it could probably fit in how store algorithms are working. Still, one thing that we needed to see is how keywords had started changing, keyword ranks had started changing specifically. So here I've compiled 3 examples for what changed. One being a fully branded search, VPN LAT. One being somewhat of a hybrid because bacon, you might know or not know, is the name of a popular game, also the name of a popular app, uh, beyond the fact that it is the name of a delicious food. College, on the other hand, not as delicious to many, and something that is a keyword that we consider to be fully generic. In all 3 cases, these keywords are interesting to understand the algorithm change because of what we can observe in the top 10 to 15 results. A lot of times, the number one result would stay the same or stabilize quickly. But what was really interesting is that before the algorithm change, the logic at play in Apple search results, App Store search results, was that you would have a query match a specific intent, and essentially the store trying to first show all the relevant query results for that particular intent. However, what can happen is that a query can match more than one intent. For instance, with bacon, it could match the intent of playing a game or the intent of the app and its competitors. And what has happened after the store algorithm change is that now top results tend to show several intents within the first 15 results. So every time it's going to be the few best results for that intent. But we now see this sort of bias towards diversity and trying to interpret what the search query might mean before before super focusing on one particular intent. This particular process has also been at play with Google Play. But before I get to it, I just want to call out, because I did tell you OCR is a possibility. We don't know for sure if it's at play, but one thing that makes us say it's probably not as much OCR as a more advanced method for natural language processing is the fact that the algorithm change we just told you about happened in the US, but we did not see any signal of the same magnitude in France or other non-English speaking countries. So the result we have today is that most likely keywords text is still what drives search results as a majority. We know conversion is still a factor as well, so that's why you should, in my opinion, always assume OCR is still a possibility, just because even if the keywords in the screenshots are not indexed per se, having your screenshots match very clearly what people have searched for, is likely to give you better conversion, and in turn that will still give you better rankings. But for what is happening with AI, OCR is not a certainty. And what's clearer is this idea of NLP now having this approach where the stores are trying to first identify an intent. And if there's multiple intents that could be linked to your query, trying to show you diverse results to be able to get you closer to what you meant quickly. Google Play has been following that same logic with the introduction of guided search, which was brought to the Play Store in September. So guided search, I think, does it in a more UI friendly manner, because what you have is essentially Google reading the search query, in our example here, fighting games, and deciding that this query is broad and can be subdivided into queries such as arcade fighting games or beat 'em up games. And when guided search makes that view, what it's going to present to a user is essentially a preview of more specific queries directly in the initial search results page, but also the option of tapping to go further and then just going to the usual search results that were already computed by the store as well. So what's interesting in what these changes are telling us is that we are changing the assumption of search. Back when I started ASO, which is way too long ago now, the idea was always that app metadata simply needed to match keywords people were searching for. And we had this sort of exact match logic, and trying to just have keywords in the metadata match terms inside the search queries exactly, thinking the store was simply trying to match the characters with one another. With the consideration of natural language processing now, we're in a much more complex reality. Um, from a user perspective, we have to acknowledge that now when a user decides they want to find an app for a certain need, they might first try to figure out how to search for the app before going to the final search. They might still search anyway and start with a broad search and maybe then try to use complements to their search. They might turn to an LLM, ChatGPT or Gemini or any other of your preference. They could turn to recommendation platforms. They could turn to forum type apps like Reddit. In general, they're going to have that step, and that's going to lead them to have a more specific search, which can either be searching straight for a brand or searching for a content or searching for a feature type. For developers, the challenge at that point is to say, I need to know what is my best message for what was searched, and either have my default page address what is usually going to be the branded search, or have a series of custom pages that's going to be your CPPs, your CSLs, ready to be matched with the content search. So that's going to be the general ID, and that's also includes a consideration for conversion. But that does bring us to the question of how do we make sure we are first seen? How do we make sure we are first discovered before we can have the specific message? And this is where we can start talking about what we call semantic optimization. Before I hand it over to Chloe, I just want to kind of contextualize the topic of semantics at AppTweak. Long-term clients may remember that back in 2021, we released the very first iteration of what we now call Atlas AI. Back then, it was just called Atlas. And the vision we had for Atlas was we wanted to create a map of the store so we could better understand the relationship between two keywords or between two apps or between an app and a keyword. And that got us to the idea of semantics because we realized that words that were using the same characters, and it looks like I'm dying. Am I back?
You're here
Okay, so
for me.
yeah, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, guys, for the internet delay. Yeah, what I was saying is that back then, what we had with the LLMs, before the LLMs, was already the notion of um, certain keywords not meaning the same thing in the store and outside the store. And so our favorite example back then was how running and run did not mean the same thing in practice. For the store, run was about games, whereas running was about health and fitness. So that dipped us out off to the idea that we needed to look not just at keywords independently, but as groups. And that's where we started our journey towards semantics. And today we see how that journey matches what developers now need to do if they want to have a better optimization process for how to appear in search results. So I'm going to turn it over to Chloe because you have much better and much clearer examples for how it works today.
Thank you, Simon. So it's true that search is becoming much more intent based. So as Simon just said before, LLM were only matching keywords and then indexing keywords in the metadata. But now what's happening is that LLM are really trying within search to understand what the users mean. So for example, on the stores, they will look at a user search at the topic, but not only at the topic, but also the specificity of it. Maybe the user is searching for a specific app already, or maybe the user is still in a discovery phase. And here comes in the semantic extrapolation. Actually, the LLM will look at your metadata and highlight, analyzes the different topics and again, the level of specificity. And this combination of what I just said influences strongly now the search results because they will be either super diversified, either very specific. But I know this is maybe kind of complicated to understand everything without an example, let's say. So today, I would like to start with an app that I think a lot of people know here, Spotify, and I hope it will clarify everything. So I would like to start with the first step of the semantic keyword optimization, which is defining, building your keyword clusters. But before building the keyword clusters, you want to maybe identify the different topics of your app or of your game. So here for Spotify, this is a small tip. I advise you actually to just look at the store at your app page. Here, if we look only at title and the subtitle, and I love this example because just by looking as well as the first screenshots, you can already find the three main topics. We find that the three main directions, let's say, of Spotify are music, podcast, and audiobooks. If you just wonder why I didn't include the songs and playlists that are actually in the subtitle, it's simply because by intuition, we know that songs and playlists are more subtopic of music. Of course, there are other clusters, other topics that I could have identified, but today I want to illustrate with those three ones. Now that you have your three different topics, you would like to populate those topics with keywords. So you would like to build keyword clusters. Again, a small tip that you will understand a little bit later in the slide why it's super important to do that. I invite you to go on the keyword research part and to create actually one list per topic that you identify. So that's why here you see that I have a list for music, podcasts, and audiobooks. And actually, it's a little bit of a spoiler here, but those lists will be super useful to assess the performance of the clusters, but you'll see in like 2 slides. Now that you have your list, you want, as I said, to fill them in with keywords. Of course, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you already have a semantic dictionary with a lot of keywords. You can look at this list, try to identify the keywords that could be attributed to a topic or another. Or again, I advise you to go on the keyword suggestion speakers that we have, and especially on the semantic part, because here, so I put the music example. If you just put the topic, you have a lot of keywords that can actually be put within the clusters and representing the clusters. So here for music, I have free music, music players, song, and you can reproduce the process for each of the direction main topic that you identified. Now that you have your keyword clusters, you want to assess the performance. And just before explaining here, I just want you to notice that I'm still assessing the keyword clusters without linking them to the metadata of your app or of your game. So to assess the performance of the cluster, and that's where it's interesting to have created list. If you go on monitor performance, and if you just select one list that you created, you are provided with a full overview with metrics that will help you assess if it's actually a performing cluster or not. This one, music. I did the exercise. There are 30 clusters, 30 keywords, that I found for that clusters. Actually, I invite you to look at the left. The numbers of keywords by rank is actually very high. That's to say almost all keywords that I put within my clusters are top 10. And actually, it's illustrated if you look at the bottom at the average ranking of 3. So here, first, I can assess that this is a performing cluster. I did the same for the second one that I identified, so podcast. We see that I had selected a little bit less keywords, but actually all of them are almost in the top 10 as well, with an average ranking of 6, which is very high, a little bit lower than the music cluster, but I mean, this is kind of normal. We all know that Spotify is a little bit more positioned towards music than podcast. Yet. And here is the third assessments that I did. So for audiobooks, and this one is kind of an interesting one because we see that with the 23 keywords that are populating the cluster, none of them are in the top 10. If we look at the average ranking, we also see that the average ranking is kind of low, 47. So here we assess that out of the 3 different clusters, 2 seems performing and the other one a little bit like very much less. And something that I wanted also to highlight is that here for today's example, we selected as performing metrics the number of keywords in the top 10, the average ranking, but of course, when you're going to try to do your semantic optimization, you can look at other metrics to assess the performance. You can look at the total monthly reach, here. By the way, it's available just at the bottom of your semantic dictionary of your clusters in the keyword research part. So here, just for you to know that, of course, you can also assess the performance with other metrics, but monitor performance is already a good indicator. And now that you have your clusters, that you know which one is working more or less, you want to link the performance with your metadata. We want to understand, okay, now that I know all of this information, what keywords do I add? What keywords do I remove? So first of all, you want to understand the coverage of the clusters in your metadata. Are you talking about music in your metadata? Are you talking about audiobooks? So as you may have noticed, in my table, I added 2 columns. One is talking about the numbers of targeted keywords, which is representing exactly what I just said, the coverage. And the other one is estimated downloads, because I really want to understand the reach, the installs that I get from those clusters. For the first one, which was music, 10 keywords out of the 30 that I've identified are actually in my metadata. For podcast, 3 keywords out of 14, and for audiobooks, 2 keywords out of 24. So here, the first thing that we can notice is that we still have room for improvement, if I may say, in terms of coverage, in the sense of we have much more keywords in the clusters than the one covered in our metadata. But here, we still don't understand which keywords to add, which keywords to remove. We just assess the coverage and kind of the performance. Actually, it depends a lot on your internal strategy. And for Spotify, I would like to give you 3 options that I figured out. So, for example, you want to reinforce the cluster music and podcasts. You want to stop talking about audiobooks because maybe you think that that cluster, and it's true, is not performing. And the 2 keywords that are in your metadata, you remove those and maybe you re-inject those in another cluster, music, podcast, or both, sorry. And then you reinforce them. Maybe Spotify will want to have the direction of being really strong in audiobooks, and then they will maybe remove some keywords from the cluster music and podcast, doing the hypothesis that as those are performing clusters, they maybe are still going to continue to perform without keywords in it, and re-inject those in the audiobooks. Or maybe third option, maybe you want to diversify. Maybe you want to remove the audiobooks, but you want to have a third cluster that is still not appearing here. And as I said, actually today I gave you 3 topics for Spotify, but if you just look at the full semantic dictionary that you may have built for your app or for your game, I'm sure that you have a lot of different topics that will appear. For example, Spotify, I'm sure that I could have found the intent cluster MP3. So it's really depending on your internal strategy and the direction that you want to go. So I really want you, and it's a very important conclusion here. This is not the end of doing a classic keyword optimization. It's just an extent because now we are switching to keyword level thinking to a topic level performance. So to make a little bit the process easier, I hope it was clear, but here is still a recap. So remember, the first step was to really identify the topics of your app, of your game. Then we created clusters with lists, if feasible. Then with those lists, we assessed the performance, and it's at that stage that we decided what to remove or what to add based actually on your strategy. So I hope it was clear, and I hand it over to Simon.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Well, it looks like the chat is already sending you a lot of thanks, but obviously, if you guys want to ask more questions, we have the questions box. Before we get to Q&A, I do want to mention extra changes that might occur this year. This is going to be sort of the prediction part of the webinar. So do take everything with a grain of salt. Things are not certain, but actually one thing is, which is Ask Play. So one thing that was already floating in the air by the end of last year was whether in 2026 we'd go from having sort of a static search where you input a query and get one result to going towards a app recommendation logic where you would essentially chat with the store. And then mid-December, Google actually dropped kind of sneakily Ask Play. So Ask Play works as a chat bot and box that you can find on any, at least theoretically, on any store listing page with the promise of talk to the Play Store like a personal assistant. In practice, you can only access it with versions of Google Play above 49.3. And considering that the Play Store doesn't have the same pressure to update, like doesn't pressure users to update as systematically as Apple does with iOS and with the App Store, this does mean that already not all users might find it. Another thing is last we tested, we could find Ask Play in the US, but we could not find it in Belgium. So it's probably also restricted to certain markets. Given how Google has rolled out a lot of Gemini features outside of the EU first and progressively in different EU countries, again, if you don't find it on your Google Play device, it could also be that it's not yet available in your market. With that being said, what's really interesting here is that we have our first Play Store chatbot. It's not in search at this moment. So I think personally, this is because Google probably want to first test and improve. But the concept itself is a very clear signal of where the store is evolving. To give you a bit of insight to what we have found about Ask Play, we started asking it a few questions. And what's interesting to us is that at first it did tell us I can only answer questions about apps and games on Play. That doesn't mean, however, that Ask Play is restricted to only pulling information from the Play Store itself. You have an example here where when we asked for negative comments, it did pull data from Trustpilot. This was for HBO Max, so it also went to the developer website directly. And I'm not sure this is going to stay like this forever. I do think this is the early transition, and that would explain why Google didn't make strong public announcements about Ask Play. But I do think this is something that is likely to expand in coming months, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Apple, particularly after they finally release their much announced Siri update, also take a step towards that direction. Another question for this year that I've heard a lot is, will OpenAI release an app store? And so here I want to give everyone a bit of context. OpenAI has made an SDK that is publicly available called the Apps SDK, which essentially allows any app to give access to ChatGPT to its core features, so that a ChatGPT user could ask ChatGPT to take an action inside the app. But in practice, that is showing ChatGPT, OpenAI is taking ChatGPT towards the idea of powering an operating system at this point. It doesn't say OpenAI will go after distribution. It's definitely a possibility, but these would be two different types of efforts. So we don't have an app store made by OpenAI at this point. What you see as a screenshot on the slide is what you can find on OpenAI's website. And it's a list of apps that have integrated the apps SDK. To the last time I checked, there were 60 apps that were listed here. 53 were productivity apps, including Photoshop, including Airtable. And there were 7 apps considered to be lifestyle, including AllTrails, Apple Music, Spotify, Booking.com, and a few more. By comparison, when the App Store launched, which was 15 years ago, there were 500 apps on the very first iteration of the App Store, and so I really cannot tell you if it's going to be yes with an if, or if it will be no with a but. We're just in a situation where it is a possibility, but if you want to prepare for it, the reality is the first step is for developers and product managers to assess the interest and the value it could bring to users to integrate the OpenAI SDK. And if they choose to do so, do keep an eye as to how you could get visibility from OpenAI, but also don't forget to simply highlight how you're adding features like this in your store screenshots, in your App Store and Play Store screenshots, because these are still things that are likely to also be relevant to your current users, to people who will still be using the App Store and Play Store to discover your app. Uh, and that will be the reasonable path for the foreseeable future. One topic we haven't talked about so far in the webinar is generative AI. It's using AI for creative optimization. Um, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into another long expose. I will just say that our observations have been that Gen AI has made great progresses, but because of the many layers that often go into creating a screenshot set, it's hard to get AI to do the entire process on its own. Most likely, it's going to be designers using AI to do this faster. What is possible for any marketer, though, is to ask AI for potentially generating mockups when they're thinking about a certain ID. You can also use AI on a text base, whether in the ideation phase, trying to come up with new hypotheses that you could A/B test, as well as after your test to analyze results, to share results with the company and go through the entire cycle. So there's definitely going to be a lot of options here. There's just nothing very concrete and very final in what has been offered by Apple or Google so far. And it's going to be more on the industry to bring this trend forward. Now, predictions always come with at least one bold prediction. Mine is probably not that bold, but uh, I want to call out how custom product pages, custom store listings have been a major topic in ASO for the past few years, and Apple and Google have supported, have invested in CPPs and CSLs, and I don't think that's going to go away. So I think at some point in the future, what we could expect is for Apple and Google to essentially ask developers provide a library of pages for their app and take care of choosing which custom page to show whenever someone searches for a certain intent, a certain topic, and should be matched with a specific CPP or CSL. But I also don't think this is extremely likely to happen already this year. So, how to prepare? I do think continue to invest in CPPs and CSLs. Do consider how when you build a CPP or a CSL, it can be a topic, but it can also be about the higher level intent. Here we have an example from one of our clients, SoundCloud, where they're now testing having CPPs uh, for users who are already looking for specifically a music streaming app, which they call solution aware users, compares them to product aware users who know vaguely but about music streaming, but don't necessarily know SoundCloud very well, and navigational users being people broadly interested in the topic of music apps, but not necessarily having a very strong intent towards the idea of not just listening to music, but using specific features such as the possibility of downloading music, downloading songs to your phone. Um, on the other hand, I also want to call out what I think is going to be the most underestimated AI for ASO topic for this year, and that's what I call global rollouts. So if you remember when we were looking at the algorithm changes of last year, we saw that English-speaking countries have seen big overhauls in how search results have been calculated. We haven't seen the same happen, at least to the same magnitude, for non-English speaking countries. And so I think that in practice, something to really not lose track of this year is localization, and it's looking at when is a full switch from keyword to semantic going to occur for various languages, because LLMs are progressing in that direction as well. And I think it's something that is not necessarily going to be talked about as much as features like Ask Play, but it is something that's going to have a profound impact on ASO as well. That gets us to the end of the presentation. We do have up to 15 minutes left, so uh, we're going to just repeat the key takeaways for today, and then we'll turn to the questions box. So if you have any questions in the chat, please go duplicate them in the question box if you want them to be prioritized, because we're going to start with the questions box. And so, yeah, for the takeaways, Chloe, I hope you don't mind, I'll start. But in general, remember, the stores are reorganizing information, and that is moving the goal of ASO from visibility to discoverability instead. And that means that for developers, you need to move to an intent-based logic where your action is to optimize for semantic clusters rather than specific keywords. And with what I've presented also at the end, do not lose track of how app recommendation and insights with chatbots are also going to be a major topic for the year. And there's also going to be questions for how to invest in AI workflows for ASO.
And the ASO fundamentals remains the same. Actually, as I gave in my example, we could see that keywords are still very much important. It's just that we are not assessing the performance keyword by keyword. We're assessing the performance based on the keyword cluster, based on the intent. And as we don't want only to increase the discoverability, and still conversion is very much important, please do not forget to test as much as possible your creatives. And as Simon said with the global rollouts, please try to localize also as much as possible.
That is going to be it for the presentation. We do have time for Q&A. So we're going to dive straight in for everyone who's able to stick with us a little longer. Starting with a question from Miguel. Are replies to reviews indexed by Google and Apple? Is there any evidence of this? Um, this is a very loaded topic. I think there were also questions about whether descriptions, long descriptions specifically, were being indexed on iOS. And here, for the sake of nuance, I do need to call out that the notion of indexation is becoming harder to prove, or not the notion, but the result of indexation are becoming harder to prove, because in practice, what we are seeing is that what we observe is always ranking. It's never indexation per se. We, unlike with SEO, we don't have evidence of a robot crawler going through the app metadata. What we do see, though, is that Apple and Google are investing in trying to look at what data is available on the page and link different keywords as entities together and see if those entities semantically connect to other entities. And so on that front, um, Google at least is claiming officially to index the content of reviews. There's no clear mention of replies, although it would make sense. It is hard to prove, and so if you think you have a case that will be easy to make sure it is proof of it, I will happily review it and discuss with you. I am getting more and more cautious about the idea of proving with absolute certitude that something is happening, because what we learn from the question on last year of whether Apple was indexing text in screenshots is that you can find evidence suggesting it is the case, as well as evidence that it does not always happen. So the game is just harder to see, to be honest. And now it's just going to be what efforts are easiest, do not require too many resources, and where can you focus first. For the next question, Chloe, you might want to answer this one. Daniel is asking, how can I start introducing intents rather than keywords in my App Store metadata?
So I see that this question was asked before the example. So I hope, Daniel, that maybe the Spotify example is a little bit more clearer for you. But I would really advise, first of all, to understand the strategy that you want to take with your app or with your game. And as I said, building a lot of lists, assess them, and then try to understand the performance. If, for example, you have a cluster of keywords that is really much performing, you can maybe ask yourself if you still want to reinforce it within your metadata. So including keywords in that clusters in your keyword field, for example, or if maybe you would like to prioritize a cluster that is a little bit less performing because it's the direction that actually you want to take. So it really depends, but I hope it was at least a little bit more clearer for you. And I also wanted to answer to, I saw a question. It was Anna. What would be your view for the e-com apps who have like 10 plus different directions? So here I would advise, to be honest, to also test. Either you want to have the 10, for example, if you have 10 topics present in your own metadata, it's still a possibility, to be honest, and then to assess the performance of the keyword audit that you made live. Either you can still select a direction, maybe select 5 topics out of the 5 others, and try a second time to see how the 5 others work. So it's really up to you if you want, as I said, reinforce or diversify. It depends if you really want to be seen in all the different direction, or if there is one that is actually bringing you much more traffic.
Uh, I 100% agree. I do think also a larger consideration is always that some clusters might be easier to maximize than others. And so cluster optimization, semantic optimization is essentially the new name of the game. We are playing with the same struggles as before, which means that we're also playing in a constantly changing environment anyway. So most likely the company has a marketing strategy that pushes to try certain clusters first, but then depending on results, it's always about iterating on the process. We had a question from Niels regarding preparing CPP and CSLs for content search. What would the setup look like? So maybe the example from SoundCloud also help shows this. I think what you can do is always start by identifying topics. I always go topics before I go intent in terms of how I can work, because in my opinion, a topic can be addressed in a slightly different manner depending on the specificity of the intent. That's the tricky part with choosing whether we're talking about topics or intent. But so the first thing is to identify the topics, test which ones are working. The second is to start considering what are variations for a given topic in terms of intent. Would you do you have signals pointing to people being more or less decisive for these CPPs? And then definitely trying to experiment not just in Apple ads, but also with organic keyword, also with other paid UA channels, and just measure performance to see what your audience base reacts to more or less, and keep changing it as well, because certain messages resonate more with users at certain moments. So once again, it's kind of these it's one of these it depends answer, because there's a very large field of possibilities, but definitely you have 70 CPPs now, that you can have 50 CSLs. There's we know of a few of our clients who have maxed them out already. We do know that most people still have a margin to go, so experimentation is really the general recommendation we give. Looking for more questions. Jason is asking, we are seeing a big saturation of mass-produced generic apps flooding the app stores. Most often these apps are outranking our similar apps. Do you think we will see search algorithms in both stores start giving preference in rank to non-AI generated apps? That's that's an amazing question. Chloe, I don't know if you have an opinion. Personally, I'd say I don't think the app stores are going to be incentivized at first to give a preference to non-AI generated apps. I do think that if users show this is a preference, it will start being a consideration for them. But so if you want to play that card, maybe one area to explore is how you can convey in your metadata, in your screenshot, that the app was not AI generated, and see if that does boost, in fact, conversion. I know it's a big topic in the music industry. I don't know if it's the same in less creative industries. So I don't know which type of generic apps we're talking about, but I think there's a world of possibilities here. My advice would simply be, don't expect the stores to give you preference. Look for ways to try and force them to give it to you. Um, Matthew, nice to see you, Matthew. Any guidelines to writing descriptions for NLP and LLMs? Um, Chloe, correct me if I'm wrong. I think maybe this one, the best is to say check out AppTweak's blog, because this is an entire webinar we could have just on that specific question. Um, there are some easy tips, just like really think in terms of structure. I haven't had a chance to really test a lot of the HTML formatting impact on how Google is now interpreting long descriptions. But in general, I know LLMs tend to like more structured text. So that would be one. There's so many more that I think will probably provide a more detailed content on this one soon. Malte is writing, in the context of intent, is it still important to have a high density for a certain keyword you are intending to rank for, or is it more about using diverse keywords? What would be your answer here, Chloe?
I would say that still having the high densities for Android, it's still very much important, but you would like actually to identify the different topics and the different keywords that you want to diversify on, and to also increase their densities. So maybe the goal here is that we'll have to increase densities for much more keywords than before, and to find kind of a threshold. But I'd be interesting to see Simon's opinion here.
Uh, I mean, I agree with you. Basically, I think one thing you may want to research a bit more, Malta, um, is basically how in AI technologies, keywords are not keywords anymore, because at the end of this, they're just strings of text. But what AI is doing is trying to identify within a text what it calls entities, which can be topics, which can be subtopics. Like there's there's a lot of literature to help you there. But I think what you want is to understand at times specifically repeating a keyword is the best way to increase
Mm-mm.
your relevance for a certain entity. Sometimes it's actually diversifying. So it's, I hate it, but it's one more it depends answer. I did see someone bring up the Google Natural Language API that can be publicly tested on the web. That can be a great tool to understand what words in your long descriptions are flagged as entities and start experimenting. So I definitely would advise this. I see this was coming from Alexandra. So thank you, Alexandra, for mentioning it. We are also arriving at the end of the webinar. We are arriving at the end of the hour. So thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us for the full hour.
Thank
We'll have
you.
a recording going your way. Keep in touch for sure. There's going to be a lot of things happening in ASO this year. So we'll be very excited to have more to share soon. And do give us feedback about today's session. Do give us suggestions if you feel like there's something we should build next for our product team. They are also watching this webinar, so we're very curious with everyone's feedback, and we'll see you very soon. Bye bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.